Okay, so we mentioned the mitzvos already, but the Rambam starts out with the mitzvos. So there are 22 mitzvos between Shemitah and Yovo. So just briefly, number one is a positive commandment to rest from that the land should rest from work on the seventh year. Number two, a negative commandment not to work the land. Number three, not to work with works of trees. Remember, there's two pairs of mitzvos. Lo tizra, you can't plant, and lo tizmor, you can't prune. Because pruning is making trees grow, and zriya is planting in the ground. And then dalet, lo yiktar tzviach keneged hakotrim, you can't harvest stuff that grows out of the ground. And hey, shalo yiftar hanazirim keneged habotrim, you can't cut like grape clusters the way that grape harvesters cut. 6, you have to be mishameh, whatever that means, the stuff that comes out of the ground. 7, you have to cancel loans. 8, you can't pressure or claim to get your repayment from a loan that you had lent someone. 9, you cannot refrain from lending before Shemitah out of feeling that, oh, I'm taking a risk if he can't pay me back before Shemitah. 10, there's a mitzvah to count the years every 7, which is, the Rambam will say it's a mitzvah about Beis Din. Number 11, to sanctify the 50th year, that's Yovel, because the Rambam counts Yovel and Shemitah. I mean, he mentions the laws of Yovel in this sefer also. And then there's the rest of these mitzvahs all have to do with Yovel, but it's basically treating Yovel like Shemitah. The laws that apply to Shemitah apply to Yovel, which is a big machlokas Rambam and Rabbi. Well, actually, no, that's not the machlokas. It's a different thing. And then there's laws about returning, the land's returning. So if you had sold a field, it comes back to you at Yovel. So there's all types of laws in regard to regard to that. So those are the mitzvos for Shemitah and Yovel. The rest of those are mitzvos. So in what I've been learning, it seems a lot of things from nowadays are done with accordance with the Chazon Ish's opinion. Now, in the 40s and 50s, the Chazon Ish's opinion was not at all widespread at the time. So, I mean, Rav Kook, who died in 1935, his influence was very big in Eretz Yisrael, and also Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, who I think died in the 50s, who actually is Mrs. Landy's grandfather. So he was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. So his psakim were also very, very widely held, but I was looking and I'm not sure that there actually is a sefer of his psakim on Shemitah. I was looking around and didn't find it. There is a sefer also, though, which some of his psakim might be in there. I have that copy. I have to dig it out from Rav Tukachinsky. Rabbi Chil Mechel Tukachinsky is known for, he did some work on the international date line and the luach. Like we here in America, we use the Ezra's Torah luach, just for when it's Shabbos and Yantif, what Haftorah it is, saying halal, this and that. So in Eretz Yisrael, the luach even now is called the Tukachinsky luach, based on his calendar that he made way back when. So he also has a book about Shmitta, and so like what I'm talking about right now with Rav Kook and Rav Chaim Echel Tukachinsky, those are probably not as widely used right now because a lot of people take the psakim of the Chazon Ish. Now it happens to be that Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who recently passed away right after Purim, so he was a nephew of the Chazon Ish, and he wrote a sefer on the Rambam here. And so obviously everything was Chazon Ish's psakim, either what the Chazon Ish wrote and what the Chazon Ish, what he heard from the Chazon Ish that wasn't written, even though probably lots and lots of what the Chazon Ish paskin was written. So there are some things that I may not talk about here, and maybe we'll do some of it on Shavuos night, but we'll already talk about some bigger topics as we go through the Rambam here. Even today, we'll have some things that are bigger topics, but we'll talk about the basics. Okay, Rambam halacha aleph, perak aleph, halacha aleph. Mitzvos to say lishbos me'avodas haaretz, avodas ilan b'shana shvius. There's a positive commandment to rest from working the land and from working on the trees during the 7th year, as the pasuk says, "V'shavta Haretz Shabbos Lashem," and the land will rest the Shabbos for Hashem. B'nemar, and there's another pasuk, "V'charish v'katzer tishbos," from plowing and from harvesting you will rest. Whoever does one of the works of the working of the land or trees in this year has nullified the positive commandment, and Avra Alosa say violated a negative commandment. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, your fields you should not sow with seeds, and your vineyards you should not prune or whatever. So the first 2 psukim he mentioned were positive commandments. This one is a negative commandment. So Rav Kook starts out, the first thing he mentions is a couple opinions that if a non-Jew is working in a Jew's field, the Yisrael transgresses the positive commandment. So, meaning I hired a non-Jew to work in my field. So even though I didn't cut anything or I didn't plant anything, I didn't violate any negative commandments, but since I'm causing the land to not rest, I am violating the positive commandment of the land needing to rest by hiring him. And he compares it to Shabbos, that if you have a non-Jew using your animal to do something, you violate your positive mitzvah of your behemoth resting. So Shabbos is a partially good analogy for this, because Shabbos, we also have positive commandments to rest on Shabbos, and we have negative commandments not to do malacha on Shabbos. And actually he's going to talk about this in a little bit. What about, I'm jumping the gun here, but Rav Kook says, what if you do everything except the 4 malachos that we know explicitly you're not allowed to do? So let's say it seems that if I have a plant that's in what do we call it? I have a planter that I have a bush or a tree, and I transferred it into the ground. I dug a hole in the ground and I transferred it. So that's not the same as planting a seed. But then you did everything you would need to make the tree grow well, but you didn't actually plant the seed, and you didn't. Digging a hole is a little bit of a shayla in itself. But then you also didn't harvest it in the regular way. So you didn't violate any of the actual negative commandments. The Rav Kook is going to say it appears to him that you violated the positive commandment. So in that respect, I think it is a little bit similar to Shabbos, because there might be a different thing, because besides for the positive commandment of Shabbos, there seems to be something which might be rabbinical, uvdin dechol. We don't do weekday type activities on Shabbos, even if it's not one of the 39 malachos. So I don't think Rav Kook means it exactly that way. And also there is a big machlokas between the Ramban and Rabbeinu Yonah, the Rashbam. The Rashba agrees with the Ramban in regard to, I think Rabbeinu Yonah's opinion is there's only a positive commandment on Shabbos. So again, there's no proof that this applies to Shmitta, but in regard to Shabbos, Rabbeinu Yonah says the positive commandment to rest on Shabbos only applies to the 39 malachas that you're not allowed to do, and probably their toldos, the derivative acts also. So if you did any of those acts besides for violating the negative commandment, you violated the positive commandment of not resting. Whereas the Rashba and the Ramban hold no. Even if it's other things, or maybe the Rabbeinu Yonah holds it's only the 39 themselves and not the toldos, and the Rashba and the Ramban extend it to anything, even derivative work. So if you did those things on Shabbos, or even rabbinic things, if Chazal said not to do this on Shabbos and then you did it, you're violating the Eraisa of resting on Shabbos. You didn't keep the positive commandment of resting on Shabbos. Okay, so let's see what else is Rav Kook says. So Rav Kook saying, when it's talking about a person doing the work, if you hired a non-Jew to do it, there's no way you could violate it. But in regard to the field resting, from the fact that you hired a non-Jew to do work on the field has not rested, so therefore you have violated the positive commandment. Okay, and then there's a big machlokas here in general. Can you rent your field to a non-Jew? So the Marit says that you are allowed to rent your whole field to a non-Jew, and then it's not a problem if he works it on Shabbos. Okay, halacha beis in the Rambam. Ein olokum min Torah ela Azriel ela Zmira ve'ala Ksira ve'ala B'tzira. Ve'achar hakeren ve'achar shar ilanos. You only get lashes from a Torah for violating a Torah law for planting seeds or on pruning a tree or a grapevine, and for harvesting stuff from the ground, or B'tzira, which is harvesting grapes. And even though the verb B'tzira is for grapes, it whether it's a vineyard or whether any other fruit-bearing tree, we'll see about non-fruit-bearing trees also, those are the deraises. So the question is, in Halacha Aleph, the Rambam brought a pasuk that said B'charish about Katzer Tishbos. Now B'charish usually means Charisha is plowing. So if the pasuk says you're not allowed to plow, it seems that plowing is forbidden on Shemitah also. The problem is that everyone says that there's only 4 malachos, 4 activities that you can't do: planting a seed, pruning a vine or a tree, and then harvesting a plant, or cutting off the vineyard, harvesting from a tree. So plowing itself is not listed. So the question is plowing actually forbidden or not from the Torah? So Rav Kook says from this halacha, it's clear that if you plow, you don't get malchus, which you don't get lashes from the Torah. So some say, even though you don't get lashes, it still is forbidden from the Torah. But some say that it's only forbidden rabbinically, just like any of the derivative malachos. The derivative works are we say they're asur, but they're not the main. Well, he makes it sound like they're only d'Rabbanan, which may not be so clear, but let's assume that they're only rabbinic. So plowing is also would be rabbinic. So then the question is, why does the pasuk say charisha? So I think the simple answer would be, even though the word charisha usually means plowing, we'd have to say that charisha would also probably include the whole planting process. So in regard to Shmitta, plowing the field isn't one of the malachos, but we use the word charisha to talk about planting. That's, I don't know, it's not exciting, but that's a possible answer. Halacha Gimel, Uzmir b'chlal zriya u'b'tzir b'chlal k'tzira. Pruning, which is done for a tree, is the same category as planting a seed. And b'tzira, the harvesting the grapes, is part of harvesting things that grow from the ground, whether it's vegetables, whether it's grain. V'lama partan hakasov. So why did the pasuk specify these 4 acts if they're really different, just 4 acts? Planting a tree, planting a plant or causing a tree to grow, and harvesting plants or grain versus harvesting from a vine. Lomer lecha al shtei toldos elu bavad hu chayav al shar toldos shavodos haaretz im shar avodos shelo nisbar shemin hazeh ein lo kalei al makin also al makis mardos, to tell us that these are the only 4 things which are you get malchus, but everything else that you do, even all the derivative acts and all the other main acts of categories of acts, you don't get lashes from the Torah level, but the Beis Din would give you rabbinic lashes for doing any of the other any activities. So let's say watering, fertilizing. He's going to talk about a lot of other things that, and we'll see it soon. Things we learned in the Mishnah about things to keep the bugs away or other things. So even though they support the growing, but it's not the actual planting process. And so Rav Kook says, so this is a big topic in and of itself. He treats it very briefly here. trees and plants that are in your house, it is a doubt if there is a prohibition of Shemitah, even for the explicit toldos. The explicit malachos. So let's say somehow you had a little, you remember Guy and Dom, so he had an orange tree, but was it in the back or was it inside? It was a lemon. So let's say you have a lemon tree like Guy did inside. So can you pick the fruit like normal on Shemitah if it's inside your house? So he says it's a suffix. So the Yerushalmi and Orla has a full discussion. And the Yerushalmi and Orla says that things that are grown in a house, the regular halachos that apply to the land don't apply to it. But the Gemara seems to say that it doesn't necessarily apply to Shemitah. So we're not sure if it applies to Shemitah or not. But so the Rav Kook says, since Shemitah nowadays is rabbinic, so it is, the Rambam seems to hold it's D'oraisa, but the majority of opinions hold it's only rabbinic. You can be lenient when there's a loss. So what exactly would constitute a loss? I mean, it's not like you're having commercial, you're going to be making lots of money off of your tree that you have in your house. So if there's some type of loss, you could be lenient. But also the thing is, if Shemitah would apply, you're not supposed to be making gains on it. You can't profit off of Shemitah produce. We saw a couple Mishnayos about you're selling a little bit of stuff, meaning you bought stuff and then your son sold it, or a few brothers took together and then someone sold a few things. We're not talking about commercial stuff because that certainly is usher on Shemitah. So I don't know exactly what Rav Kook means when we're talking about hefsid here. So this leads to the following case, which is discussed at length. Can you grow things? So why? So first of all, so why does the Yerushalmi and Orla say that stuff that are grown in a house, the laws don't apply? So I forget exactly. I did look it up before. I mean, a few months ago I saw it, and I don't remember exactly why. But there's two possible reasons why this halacha works. One halacha is the halacha of atzit she'eino nakul. So if you plant something in a flower pot and you put it on the ground, so if the flower pot has a hole in it, we certainly hold that it's considered growing from the ground. So if you would pick up that flower pot on Shabbos, you would violate the malacha of harvesting, even if you didn't actually harvest, but you're separating the tree from the ground. That's halacha. If you had an atzit she'eino nakul, a flower pot that didn't have a hole, it's not considered connected to the ground. So one possible reason is that if you're, so in those days though, if you planted a tree in your house, the house's floors were just dirt. So from that perspective, it doesn't seem that this halacha would work because it's considered that it's not connected to the ground. Because in those days, if you would plant a tree or something in your house, it was in the same ground. It's the same ground inside your house as it's outside the house. So the other explanation would be that because it's inside and you have a roof over it and walls around it, even if you didn't have glass windows, but it's not, it doesn't have that much benefit of being out in the sun and in the fresh air, so it doesn't grow as well as a regular tree. So that's the second possibility of why growing in a house, the regular laws that apply to agricultural halachas don't apply to it. So we'll see also, I don't think the Rambam mentions it in this parak, but we did see a Mishnah about you make a little house around a tree. Now most Rishonim, I shouldn't say most, a lot of Rishonim explain that halacha is you can't make about I forgot if it's 4 tvachim high or 1 amma high, some type of things. Like you see when there's construction, sometimes they put some sticks in the ground and they wrap some thick plastic around the tree. So you make of a certain height that's kind of to protect the tree. Except the Yerushalmi and Shvius on that halacha says you don't make a cover to protect the tree from the sun, which is kind of ridiculous because the tree needs the sun. But I guess if the sun is too hot, then it would harm the tree. And it happens to be, well, I guess maybe we'll talk about it when we get there, but on the second day of Pesach, the Haftorah talked about women who were weaving batim for the Asherah trees, which was an Avodah Zarah tree. So it's interesting how none of the Rishonim in Malachim Beis there say that batim was a thing they would put on top of the Asherah. They all say it was things around it. But if you grew it in the house, Rav Kook is mesupak if it works. Now, if you saw in the CRC thing, I think in the second or the third issue about it, they talked about, so if you grow something indoors, do we say that Shemitah doesn't apply? So some opinions say that that if you, I think they called it separated beds, whatever, meaning they put thick sheeting on the ground and they have the thick plastic sheeting, and they may have big flower pots. And so because of the thick sheeting, it's not connected to the ground. So it's like an chain or knuckle, and it's inside a greenhouse. So some opinions are from contemporary or recently or almost contemporary poskim would hold that then we could rely on that and it's not Shemitah produce. And some Rishonim point out, well, since things grow so well in greenhouses, how can you say that growing it indoors isn't as good as growing it outdoors? So they say, so some say no, because you grow it indoors, because it's in a greenhouse. So the halacha might be true if you grow it in your house. But when you grow it in a greenhouse, which is designed to grow things better, that kula would not apply. And Rav Rimon, who's the rabbi where the yeshiva Gush is, so he was involved with these people who lived in Gush Katif when they were being expelled, and after expelled, and he found out that at least where they were in Gush Katif, it actually was too hot in the greenhouses for the vegetables. It's hotter than it is outside, so it actually was detrimental to the plants to be grown in a greenhouse. So he seems to hold that that greenhouses are not beneficial for the vegetables. So something that it doesn't apply anymore, but when they still had Gush Katif, if Gush Katif is really part of Israel, which it probably Ole Bavel, the people who came back from Bavel is, like Iraq, Iran, Shushan, so they probably didn't make it all the way to Gaza, which is practically Egypt, right? So if they didn't come back, then so according to the Ravid, the first sanctity ended when they were exiled at the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. According to the Rambam, a second sanctity started when they came back and settled the land. If they didn't settle that part, it didn't have Kedusha. So to say that it's probably not Eretz Yisrael and it's indoors, that would be a big heter, but it doesn't seem that people use it as a heter nowadays. It doesn't apply anymore anyway. But the idea of growing something indoors for a greenhouse to possibly not have Kedusha Shmita is something that we could talk about at another time in greater detail. Okay, halacha daled, ketza. So what's the example? If you dig a hole or you plow for the need of the ground, you remove the stones, you fertilize it, all of these other work of the land, meaning other than actually planting or pruning. Or if you, mavrich seems to be you moved some of the roots or a significant part of the roots, or you grafted or you planted. So this netiya seems to be that you had a tree growing somewhere else and then you dug a hole and transplanted it into the ground. So it wasn't planted from a seed. So that's not a diraisa. So you do any of these other tree-related activities, you only get makin also makas martis birim. You only get rabbinic lashes because it's not any of the biblical. The two biblical things are planting a seed and pruning a tree. So even though all these things are needed to plant, you only get rabbinic lashes. So here's what Rav Kook says: if you do everything, all the work of the land. I should say the Rambam lists land-related stuff and tree-related stuff here. So he says if you work the whole land on Shemitah like you do every other year, except for not planting or pruning or harvesting a plant or harvesting the grapes, like you had a field that you only transplanted or you grafted, and then you fertilized it and things like that, and you worked it like the way you do the rest of the year. It appears that he violated the biblical mitzvah of letting the field rest. So I mentioned this earlier, but here's where Rav Kook says it. It happens to be that there's a lot of Rambans. I haven't gone through most of them, but there's a lot of Rambans in Parshas Bahar about Shemitah. And in the first of Bahar, we're going to learn and read it in a few weeks. There's lots of Rambans to talk about halachos of Shemitah there, and it seems that he's also using this from the Ramban on Chumash. Okay, halacha hey, einotin b'shvius afilu ilan srach. You're not allowed to plant on Shemitah even if it's a non-fruit tree. Meaning you want to plant an oak tree, you want to have some nice shade or whatever, or a birch tree. And you can't cut out some type of growth from a tree, which is a disease. You can't separate branches or leaves that have dried out. You don't put dust on it. The dust might be, let's say, from an oven, so it has some fertilizing properties. And you can't smoke it underneath in order to kill worms. We saw some of these, a lot of these things in some of the Mishnayos. You're not allowed to smear the young plantings with something that has some type of stink to it in order to keep the birds away from eating the fruit when the fruit are soft and young. You can't put the young figs or dates. I forget if it's figs or dates. So some of them, they don't ripen by themselves. So they used to put oil on them and potentially pierce them, and that would cause them to get ripe. So you're not allowed to do that. You can't bind them. And do any of these other things, which is part of tree upkeep. If you did any of these, you get rabbinic lashes. Again, you're not letting the tree or the land rest, but it's not actually planting or pruning, so you don't get you don't get biblical lashes. You don't get malchus. Okay, I think there's something I wanted to talk about here. Let me try to remember here. Okay. So Rav Kook says, it seems that if you're not allowed to plant. It's on the previous halacha. It's not a big deal, but it seems that a year or two ago, in the Augusta golf course in Georgia, one of their iconic trees died. So they needed to find. So they had another tree that was 90 feet away, and it was about the same size and stuff. So they had this whole massive project to dig up the root ball, and it was 30 feet in diameter or something. And they slowly moved the tree over to where this dead tree was, so they would still have a tree in that place. So doing something like that, I would think is that would include probably would include mavrich and notea, because you're changing where the roots are, but you're also actually, moving the tree. So it's not a diraisa of natia, but that would probably be at least two of these non-diraisas parts of planting. Okay. Rav Kook says if you plant a non-fruit bearing tree on Shmita, it's forbidden even if you don't plan on using the wood, because he's thinking here, maybe the problem is you're going to use the tree. So meaning we need firewood. So I'm going to plant the tree, so I'm going to be able to get firewood. He says, no, even if you're not going to use the tree at all, you just want to use it to fence off your property, or not to fence, or just to plant some trees to show that this is the boundary, it's still forbidden. Some say that you're not allowed to remove dried out grapes from the vine But Rav Kook thinks that's only if you're trying to make the vine better by removing this old thing. But if you're going to eat it, it's probably not a problem. And some say that you're not allowed to take anything dry that's dried on the tree because that's similar to cutting off the diseased part. Some say that you're not allowed to cut leaves off to make the tree lighter. Because sometimes, I don't know these things, but if there's too much weight on a tree, so from these leaves, so you might want to cut them off just to make the tree lighter, even if they're dry, so they don't weigh that much. Still, that would be forbidden since you're trying to do it to make. If you're removing a burden from a tree, the tree is going to grow a little better, right? So even though this isn't a diraisa, it doesn't seem to be the diraisa of pruning, but you're doing something to a minor thing that's going to help the tree grow better. So you're not allowed to do that. Some say you're not allowed to remove the stones that are on the roots of the trees, and you're not allowed to cover those roots that are exposed with dust if they had become uncovered. And some say that anything which is only period. There is an opinion that if you're only doing these things to keep the tree alive, but not to improve it at all, then you're allowed to do it on Shemitah. The only time that, let me rephrase this. When you're doing something that's not to improve the tree, but only to just keep it in its current state, that only applies when you're not doing anything to the tree itself. This is the Pasuk Shulchan. So the Rav Kook, it seems, uses a lot the Pasuk Shulchan. I have a couple copies of it. The Pasuk Shulchan was one of the Talmidim of the Gra who went to Eretz Yisrael, and then in diseases and stuff, his entire family died except for him and a daughter, and he made a neder that if Hashem keeps them alive, he's going to write a sefer on Hilchos Eretz Yisrael that the Shulchan Aruch didn't write. So about Truma, Meiser, Shmitta. So he wrote the sefer, and it was a very important sefer. And now the Chazon Ish's influence has gotten bigger. It seems that the Pasuk Shulchan's influence is not as strong as it used to be. But Rav Kook uses it a lot. Obviously, Rav Kook, the Chazon Ish was alive while Rav Kook was alive, but he was not too well known until he was more well known once he moved to Eretz Yisrael in the late 30s, I guess, whenever Rav Kook moved back. So if you're doing something on the tree itself, even if it's not to improve the tree, but just to keep it status quo, you're not allowed to do it because you're doing it on the tree itself. And some say that it doesn't matter, even if it's on the tree itself. If you're doing it just to keep the tree the way it is and not to improve it, you're allowed to do it even if it's on the tree itself. So therefore, they would hold that you're allowed to smear the smelly type of stuff on the tree to keep birds from eating the young fruit on it, or to keep from picking at the bark or whatever. So according to that, you're allowed to put, I don't know why you would, but you're allowed to put, I guess, sulfur on the grapevines, which is to kill certain bugs which damage the thing. So you're not doing it to improve it, but if you don't do it, there's a high likelihood that these insects or bugs or worms are going to attack the vines, and then the vines are going to get worse. And then anything that you do as a treatment against a disease that happens to grapevines, I didn't have time to look this up, but phylloxera or phylloxera, you're allowed to do them according to this opinion because you're doing it to the tree itself. So even though you're not doing it to improve it, you're only making sure you're doing it so it doesn't get the disease. So it is a machlokas if you could do it or not between these two opinions. He says you're allowed to spread some manure on it if there was some type of injury to the tree and the bark has uncovered. So this is a way that you would do it to keep it from getting worse. So you can do that so that the tree doesn't die, but you're not allowed to do any avoda that's going to strengthen the tree and to make it better. And it seems if something got cut off and the tree was going to die, you could rub oil on it, even if it somehow happened on Shemitah itself. But you're only allowed to do it so the tree doesn't die. You're not allowed to do it for the tree to get better, and certainly you're not allowed to cut a part off to make the tree grow better. Some say you're allowed to water trees and to give fertilizer if it's going to die without it, but you're not allowed to do it if it's going to make it better. And some say that fertilizing the land is always forbidden, even if it's not going to help the tree grow better, even if it's just to keep it from getting bad. That's forbidden. So this is an important phrase that comes up. L'ukme ilana, to keep the tree alive, is also forbidden. Because we do not allow stuff for l'ukme ilana. And the Chazon Ish is a big makel on this. The Chazon Ish is very lenient for that stuff. Okay, so then in regard to binding these trees, so it's a machlokus in the Mishnah what it means. Some say the branches go into the ground, so you bind them up so they're facing upwards. So I don't know if this is. So I mean, we know for palm trees, so that's where our lulavim come from. They start as a closed lulav going straight up, and then the next year when more comes, the leaves spread out and they start going to the side, and depending on how many years and how much stuff, they're going down. Now, by the time that they're going down, after a few years, they're already hard like wood, and it doesn't matter if they fall out or not. There was a very impressive storm, a thunderstorm at Kerem B'Yavneh, and a lot of those snapped off the trees. And then the fact that the palm tree kind of looks like a pineapple on the outside, those are the old branches that had got cut off or fell off. And now those are just part of the trunk of the tree. But I guess for different types of trees, if the branches were going down, that's bad for the tree. So you want to bind it just so they're pointing upwards and not downwards. But some say that this is talking about covering with them to protect them from the sun or from the cold. According to this opinion, we have to say that if this binding is to protect it that it shouldn't die, is it to protect it from dying, or is it just to keep it status quo? So it would depend on the previous opinion. If keeping it status quo is not allowed, you wouldn't be able to do it. But if you need to do it to protect it from dying, then it would be okay. No, all these halachas are halachas of Shabbos. I mean, of Shmitta. But the thing is that there's more things that are forbidden on a Torah level for Shabbos than there are for Shmitta. Because only the 4 things you would get Malchus Midiraisa. But for Shabbos, there's 39 categories. Not all of them have regard to planting. I mean, 11 of them have to do with plowing, planting, harvesting, and turning it into flour, grinding it up. But all of those derivatives are Asr Midiraisa also. That's the big difference. Okay, so then Rav Kook says, some type of taking away stuff, if it's Zmira, looks like pruning, then there's no heter to do it. Certainly if it's just to keep the tree at status quo. But if you're doing it in an unusual way, then it's not Asr Min Torah. So according to the opinion that you're allowed to do things to keep the tree at status quo, you'd be allowed to cut something off in that manner, but not in a manner that looks like pruning. Running out of time, he has a lot of stuff here, but here he talks about the house. So similarly, you're not allowed to make houses to make little, I guess, covers on the tree to protect them from the sun or from the rain. Yeah, Yerushalmi Perek Beis Halacha Gimel, yeah. So it seems that according to this, the Isser is only in a way when it'd only be Asr if it's going to make it better. according to the second opinion. But according to the second opinion, if it's just to keep it status quo, it's not going to be forbidden. But he says to make these coverings, if it's just to keep it status quo, it might be, according to all opinions, it might be okay because you're not doing anything to the tree itself. You're putting something over the tree and you're not touching the tree with it, so it might be more lenient that it would be okay to all opinions. To remove thorns that can damage the fruit is also according to everyone, because here it has nothing to do with the tree. This only has to do with the fruits. If it's going to help the fruit, it's always awesome. So, for example, there's thorns on the branches of an esrog tree. So when there's certain injuries to it, we call them, I think we call them a bletlach. So that's when a thorn had touched the thing. So Rav Kook says, if the tree is going to be fine and you're only doing something to improve the fruit, that's definitely awesome. And this is another kula that the Chazon Ish has. The Chazon Ish is much more makel about this. There's a lot more here. So, but that's the main idea, is that there's a lot of things here, is that there's a couple main opinions about if it's something if it's going to make the tree better, it's always awesome. If it's just to keep it at status quo, there's a machlokas. If it actually, you have to touch the tree to do it, then it's forbidden. But if it's you do it without touching the tree, there's an opinion that says it's okay. So that's the main thing, and most of these things that Rav Kook says on this halacha all have to do with this. So God willing, we will continue with halacha vav next week. Yeah. That's a good question. So all the agricultural halachos, with the exception of challah, began after the 14 years after they got into Israel, because they were fighting for 7 years and then they split it up. They divided the land for 7 years. So then, right. So after Yeshua, right. So all the like trumas and stuff that started 14 years later, except possibly chadash also, because according to most opinions, chadash applies in chutz la'aretz also, so it doesn't apply. So I guess, and I don't know this for a fact, I guess that year one of the Shemitah and Yovo cycle would have been after those 14 years. That's my guess. I don't know for sure. It's a good question. Rav Zevin might discuss it. I don't have that book here. I have it at home. I was looking at it last week. So yeah, that's something else. So some people say that there's a little bit of a heter to be makel in certain things because we're not really sure exactly what year it is right now. The Rambam says that he uses the calculation of the Gaonim. So that's only a small possible heter. But yes, there is. And whether that has to do with the original Shmitta, I don't know. No, the agricultural things begin with Rosh Hashanah. Yeah. Well, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns drashos from Sukkim to show that the Trumas and Maasros and the years of Orla and all that stuff, the years followed Rosh Hashanah, but for, let's say, fruit, the trees are not in bloom at Rosh Hashanah time because it's fall winter time. So then but the trees, so it would be Tu B'Shvat after Rosh Hashanah. So Rashi says because that's when the sap starts flowing again inside them. Some other Rishonim don't necessarily agree with Rashi, but it's learned out of they darshan it from Sukkah in Gemara Rosh Hashanah.